Media veteran John Rowe frequently traveled to Africa for both photography and philanthropy. His images have been published by National Geographic, The Guardian, CNN, and NBC, among others. In 2010, Rowe traveled to Ethiopia's Omo Valley, where he discovered the Cara tribe and its long-standing tradition of Mingi, the killing of children thought to be cursed. But he found one native, Laley, who was fighting to end that practice.
When I was 15 years, that's the time I see the elders come and take 2 years old baby. They just grab and they run toward the river. So the mother was crying and some people around is crying. So the elders told them, don't cry, just quiet. So I went to my mother and I asked, what's happened? And that's the time my mother's explaining me, oh, you know, there is a Mingi, woman Mingi, cheese Mingi, girl Mingi, and my mother also telling my older sisters, those are killed by Mingi practice.
Oh, it's so heartbreaking. Well, that same year, Rowe established Omo Child, a nonprofit organization that rescues, cares for, and educates these unwanted children. He then started filming Laley's story. Now, what started as a short video turned into a full-length documentary that's been invited to 39 film festivals around the world, winning dozens of awards. More importantly, both Rowe and Labuku have been instrumental in saving the lives of countless children and creating a profound cultural shift through the power of real-life stories. John Rowe joins us now. Welcome to Full Frame, John. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
First of all, this documentary is incredibly moving, powerful, sometimes disturbing. But it's also beautiful because the Omo Valley is a gorgeous place, isn't it?
It is a beautiful place. The people, the cultures, the environment, this beautiful river that runs through it. It's all very special. It's a very special place.
So for you as a photographer, I mean, I'm sure it was a treat to go there to capture these images, but initially you didn't go to make this documentary, right?
Not at all. I went there because I had learned from National Geographic that this was a place they described as the last frontier in Africa. It's tribal Africa. You're in southwest Ethiopia, very close to the Kenyan border, the South Sudan border, and there are these tribes who live along the banks of the river in villages that are very traditional and very much as they may have been hundreds of years ago.
Right.
And I wanted to visit that and see that and experience the culture, photograph these people before that changed. And I went there the first time, I went there a second time, a third time, a fourth time. I went there for 4 or 5 years, and Laley was my translator and my guide. And it was after 5 years that he came to me and told me about this story that just, you know,
because you had no idea before that.
I had no idea that they killed children.
Right.
In some of these tribes.
Yeah.
Because they thought they were cursed.
And it's a tradition called Mingi, as I just mentioned.
Yes.
And what's shocking is the reasons why they think these kids are cursed, right? It's things like they're a twin, their top teeth grow first before their bottom teeth. You know, when you first learned of this, you must have been absolutely in shock, as I was when I watched this documentary.
I was in shock. At the same time, I also have seen a lot of suffering in this area, too, because there's in such a remote part of Africa, there's no medicine, there's no doctors, there's no hospitals, there's no clean water, there's no electricity, there's no communication. And they don't have a written language. There's no explanation for why there's a drought or why somebody gets sick and dies. They only have these old myths and beliefs that have been handed down for generations.
And never questioned, right?
Never questioned. So it makes perfect sense to them that there's this curse that causes these bad things to happen.
Right. That's the explanation for them.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Laley that you befriended, and he was a member of this Cara tribe that practices Mingi, right? Tell me how you met him and the very crucial role he played in all of this.
Absolutely.
Right?
So Laley was introduced to me first to be a translator and a guide. He came from one of these villages, but as a young boy had gone to school and learned English and gotten an education. And so he was very helpful for me, introducing me to people who I might photograph, interpreting the culture for me, all of these things. And he was, at the first time I met him, he was 18 years old, and he was a young guy, and he introduced me to his girlfriend, and he's now married and has children, and I've watched him grow up, and he was the one who first decided, because as you saw in the clip, he learned from his mother that he had 2 older sisters that had been killed. He saw a child killed when he was 15, when he was home from school, and that affected him so deeply that he decided, someday I'm going to try and stop this. Someday I'm going to rescue these children.
Which is really courageous, right? As a tribe member, and again, having grown up in this culture, to then stand up and question it, and then be willing to try to do something to stop it.
Absolutely. And really, you know, you have to understand that in that world, they really do believe in this curse.
Right.
And they think that that is what is responsible for hardship, death, droughts, other things, famine. And for Laley to challenge that, he risked his life, because there were people in the tribe who thought what he was bringing to them was a bad thing, a bad idea, and it was going to risk their health and their survival. And so more than once there were death threats made to Laley, and he risked his life to do this.
But he stayed committed, didn't he?
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
We're going to take another look at a clip from the documentary. This one is Laley Biwa. And he talks about what happened with a child that he had with his then girlfriend, who is now his wife. So let's take a look at that.
You see, she was my girlfriend. And you see, from her is one child was killed. You see, the girl group took the baby after she gave the birth, take to the forest, and on the mouth of the baby they put soil completely, and no breathing, nothing. They died. It's a boy. It's a boy.
See, I already saw this documentary, and it's making me choke up again, because it's so heartbreaking for him to tell the story. He doesn't understand, right? I mean, but it's tradition, so he could do nothing about it.
Exactly. That interview in particular was very emotional and very difficult for us. I've known that Laley Biwa, for a long time. I actually met him a year before I met Laley Labuko. And we've been very close. I've spent a lot of time with Laley Biwa. And none of us knew that story until after 6 weeks of being in the Omo filming this documentary. We had a delay, and we had a couple of hours that we had to wait for a vehicle to come to get us. So I said to Laley, do you mind if we put a microphone on you and just get your story about Mingi? And he went on to tell us his personal experience and what you just saw there.
Gosh.
It was a very dramatic moment for us.
What I also find really fascinating and disturbing, of course, is that even though the women are bearing these children and, you know, they're suffering this loss, it's actually they're the ones who are oftentimes ordered to kill the babies.
Exactly.
That, I just can't even wrap my head around that concept, and to be able to do that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And in fact, one of the definitions of Mingi is a child born to an unwed mother. So imagine a girl, a woman being pregnant for 9 months and knowing that entire time that when that baby is born, that child is immediately going to be killed. And as you say, it's usually by other women, in the family. It's a very, disturbing, difficult.
I mean, rips at you in so many ways. But let's talk about the positive, because you obviously saw a need to try to help change this tradition. Not an easy thing to do. You started the Omo Foundation. Tell me about the work that you've done and how you've been able to execute.
Sure. So, first thing is, I didn't go in there with the idea that we were going to change a culture or influence this. It was Laley who wanted to make this change. So we simply wanted to help him any way we could, support his work. We thought we'd make a short little YouTube video to help him raise money for the children that he was rescuing, because he was at night, oftentimes risking his life to rescue these children.
Yeah.
And so when he asked me to help, at that time he had 24 kids that he rescued, and he didn't have the resources, he didn't have the money to pay for their food and their care.
Yeah.
He's still struggling to do that. But I just decided that, I had to. You
had to do something.
I had to do something.
Yeah.
We that's not the sort of thing you can walk away from.
Right.
When you're faced with a situation where somebody is risking their life, rescuing children, and has no other source of support, and comes to you and says, please help me.
Do you have a memorable rescue? I mean, I'm sure they're all memorable because you're rescuing a child, a baby, but is there one occasion where you just couldn't believe what was happening?
Probably the rescue, I think, that affected us all the most was a little girl who was born, and at this point, the government had gotten involved, Laley and Omo Child were involved, and the elder said, okay, you don't want us to kill the child, that's fine. We'll put her in a hut, and we'll only give her water. And for 2 weeks, this baby was only given water. And after 2 weeks, finally, the elders agreed and the government agreed that Omo Child and Laley could rescue this child. Well, if you told me that a baby could be born and only given water for 2 weeks and survive that,
you would have said no way.
I would have said no way. Instead, what we ended up rescuing was this little girl who was just a little skeleton, and we took her to a hospital about 125 miles away from the village. The doctors saw her, they began to cry, and they said, I don't think she'll survive. Well, I was just there a month ago, and I can tell you that not only has she survived, but she's thriving.
Oh my gosh, that's a miracle.
It's a miracle, along with her 45 other brothers and sisters, because now there's 46 kids there.
Wow.
And her name's Tensai, and every time I go there now, one of the first things I do is I look and see, where's Tensai at? And how is she looking? And actually, she's a little plump now.
Oh,
which
good
is
for her.
Which is wonderful.
Oh my gosh, now that's a great story.
Yeah.
Another great result, which is pretty amazing, is that you actually got the Cara tribe, Laley, Leboko, to convince them to drop this tradition of Mingi. Here is a scene from that part of the documentary. Let's take a look.
On July 14th, everything is changed. After that ceremony, something nobody expected. Big rain.
And the rain is coming. Today is really the spiritual day. And you can see that how the rain is coming now after they stop everything. This is amazing.
That was amazing.
That was amazing.
What a symbol of that kind of victory, right? I'm curious, though, what do you think switched for the tribe? Why did they finally decide to drop this ancient practice?
That's a great question, and I've often wondered. I really think it has to do with Laley Lebuko and Laley Biwa and their ability to convince the other members of their tribe that it just
Doesn't make sense.
doesn't make sense. It's
Right.
not true. It's not real. Unfortunately, there are other tribes in the Omo that continue this practice, and today this still goes on
Right.
in
Right.
certain tribes, and it's very difficult. And Laley is continuing his efforts,
Is he?
as is the government, as are
And
other
are you
people.
getting support from the government in these efforts?
Absolutely, we are. It's just once again, it's in such a remote location.
Yeah.
You know, you're so far away from resources of pretty much any kind,
Right.
that it's difficult for the government, for Omo Child, for everybody to get there and to convince them. Laley needs support. He needs help financially.
Right, because he's taking care of all of these children.
He's taking care of the 46 children that he's already rescued. He's trying to convince these other tribes to stop killing.
Right.
He needs vehicles, he needs fuel, he needs personnel to do all of this. So that's why we, try and tell this story whenever we can. That's why we made the film.
Absolutely.
Because
Powerful vehicle to do that.
We hope that long term this will help support these, get money to support these
Well,
kids.
one question about the kids that you rescue.
Yes.
They're not up for adoption, right?
No.
They're not kids that you're going to give to other families.
Right.
And so, do they ever see their families? Do they ever get reunited? I mean, how does that work?
It's on a case-by-case basis. Some of the birth mothers and fathers want to visit their children.
Okay.
Others, because sometimes they're born to young girls who get pregnant and so forth, and those girls go off and marry and have other families. They're not so interested in the children. So occasionally there's visitations. It varies. But in terms of adopting, so many children have been adopted from Africa or adopted to America or Europe or other places. And for many people, that's a good thing. My wife and I have 2 growing up kids, and we adopted both of them at birth. So we're adoptive parents ourselves. We've experienced adoption in our family. But for these children, we all believe, from the government to Laley to myself to board members and so forth, we all believe that these children should remain in Ethiopia. They should get the best education they possibly can receive, and be the leaders of tomorrow in a place that we've already talked about is very remote,
Right.
is just starting to emerge into this modern world. And those people will need these leaders, and they'll need teachers and nurses and doctors, and hopefully these kids will be that.
Well, I think they probably will be, because of knowing where they came from and the help that they're getting from folks like you and Laley. So thank you, John. Thank you so much for spending time with us and telling this really powerful story that needs to be told.
Thank you so much for having us.
Well, coming up next, how one Chinese-American filmmaker helped put the spotlight on forgotten Chinese Americans who served during World War II. We'll be right back.